Well, good evening. It's my privilege again to be with you. I really appreciate the good work of CB Matrix and the classes that are being offered. And tonight I'm privileged to introduce you to the land of Israel, a geographical introduction to the land of the Bible. And I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to do this. There's only one thing I would enjoy more, and that is to take you in person to the land of Israel. That's not possible tonight, but I hope sometime in your lifetime you will visit the land of Israel. According to the Torah, the people of God were to go up to Jerusalem 3 times a year. Deuteronomy 16, verse 16. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place where he chooses at the feast of unleavened bread, the feast of weeks, and the feast of booths. And this instruction from Deuteronomy 16, verse 16, highlights the importance of Jerusalem in the religious experience of God's people. And while on the basis of the new covenant, we're not required by law to go up to Jerusalem 3 times a year. Nevertheless, I think it's very relevant for us to study about the land of the Bible and about Jerusalem. And I would just say to you that one of the very best investments you can ever make in your spiritual life and your biblical education is to go to Israel and have a personal encounter with the land of the Bible. It's my privilege to do that here at Western Seminary, and every other year we take a group of students to Israel to study there, and it's a wonderful privilege. Jerome was the translator of the Latin Vulgate, and he called a visit to the Holy Land the 5th Gospel. He said, you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John from the Bible, but the 5th Gospel you read as you walk the land. You walk the land and see the land in which the Bible was written. Bargel Pixner, a scholar who lived his life in the land of Israel, said 5 Gospels record the life of Christ. 4 you will find in books, 1 you'll find in the land they called holy. Read the 5th Gospel, and the world of the 4 will open up to you. I think that's really true. As you experience the land of the Bible, all of a sudden things you've read about and heard about and imagined will come to life as you go to the places where Jesus actually spoke and did his miracles. And the Jewish people in the biblical period set aside 1/10 of their income annually to go to Jerusalem, and they went 3 times a year. And there's nothing that will strengthen your spiritual life and your understanding of the Bible more than a visit to the Holy Land. We call it the Holy Land because God, a holy God, revealed himself there. And that term actually comes from Scripture, the Holy Land. Zechariah 2, verse 12. God revealed himself there in the Holy Land. The Bible also calls it the Promised Land because God promised it to his people Israel. Modern Israelis call it Eretz Israel. The term Eretz means land in Hebrew, and it's the land of Israel. Eretz Israel, because it's the land of the nation of Israel. And here we view the land from a satellite looking down on the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean Sea. You can see Cyprus off there in the distance, pointing its long finger toward Antioch, from which Paul set sail on his missionary journeys. And a little closer in, you can see the Dead Sea. That's the longest body of water there in the center of the picture. And then up from that, you can see the Jordan River going up to the Sea of Galilee. Along the coastal plain, you can see it's pretty smooth along the coastal plain, except for one point just opposite the Sea of Galilee, where the nub of Mount Carmel sticks out into the Mediterranean Sea. So this is the land that we're studying tonight, the land of Israel. The land of Israel is actually a land bridge between 3 continents. And this image illustrates that. To the south you've got Africa, to the east you've got Asia, and to the northwest you've got Europe. And Ezekiel 5 verse 5 says, this is Jerusalem. I have set her at the center of the nations, with the lands all around her. And that's a very accurate description of Jerusalem and the land of Israel as a land bridge. You know, if you wanted to travel from the continent of Europe down to the continent of Africa 100 years ago, you'd have to go through Israel. or go on a sea route. But if you were going to go by land from Africa to Asia, you'd have to go along through Israel. Israel is really the land bridge between the three major continents. And so it's very strategically located. In this schematic diagram, it kind of illustrates that. Notice you've got the Black Sea to the north, the Red Sea to the south, the Mediterranean Sea to the west, and the Arabian Desert to the east. And right in the center of it all is Israel. If you wanted to go to Europe from Egypt, you'd have to go through Israel. If you wanted to go from Egypt to Asia, you'd have to go through Israel. Or from Arabia to Europe, you'd go through Israel. God strategically placed the people of Israel at a junction between the continents, so Israel could fulfill its destiny of being a light and a blessing to the nations. The area shaded in green is called the Fertile Crescent. It's called the Fertile Crescent because of the water sources that provide irrigation and allow crops to grow. In the east, in Mesopotamia, we've got the Euphrates River and the Tigris River that water this region. And then along the west, along the Mediterranean Sea, you've got the moist Mediterranean sea breeze that waters the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea, and Phoenicia and the land of Israel. Then in the south, you've got Egypt with its delta and the Nile River that floods and irrigates this region. So you've got this huge crescent of fertility called the Fertile Crescent. And where's Israel? Right in the center of it. Once again, if you're going to travel from Babylon over to Jerusalem, you can't go through the desert. You can't go through the Arabian Desert. You're going to go along the Fertile Crescent and make your way to Israel, and then if you want to go further south, to Egypt. Israel has always been the corridor between the great nations, and it continues that way today. There's no land in this region that is more strategic than this little tiny land of Israel. And you can see it's right at the center of these Middle Eastern countries, with Turkey and Syria to the north, Lebanon to the north, Jordan and Iraq to the east, Egypt to the south, Saudi Arabia to the southeast, and right in the center of it all is the land of Egypt. Israel still is the key to the Middle East. You know, if something happens in South Africa, you don't read about it in the front page. But if something happens in Israel, you read about it, because it's so central even today. Even though you can fly over these great bodies of water, Israel is still central in this region. Now, I use the name Israel to describe this land, but it's also referred to as Palestine. Where did that name come from? Well, the name Palestine is derived from the name Philistine, and it refers to the sea people who migrated from the Aegean Islands about the middle of the 12th century BC. They tried to land in Egypt but were repulsed by the Egyptians and ended up settling on the coastal plain of the land we know as Israel. And this region was called Philistia, after the Philistine, these sea people. Now, when the Romans conquered Judea in AD 70, they said, this isn't the land of the Jews, Judea. In disdain for the Jewish people, they said, this is the land of the Philistines, and we're going to call it that. And so the Roman conquerors named it Palestine, Palestina, to refer to the land of the Philistines. Well, the name stuck, and so the land began to be known as Palestine or Palestina. When my grandfather and my grandmother visited the land of Israel in the early 60s, they went to Palestine. They went to Palestine, and in Palestine they saw Palestinian Jews and they saw Palestinian Arabs. Everybody living in this land was called Palestinian. And Palestinian was simply a designation for the people who lived in Palestine. With the conflict between the Arabs and the Israelis, the Arabs in this region took on the name of Palestinian, and they began to use this more as an ethnic designation. They were of Arab descent, but they called themselves Palestinians, and they referred then to the Jews as the Jews and they the Palestinians. And so today we have the conflict between the Palestinians, who are in fact Arabs, and the Jews who live in this land. Well, the land is primarily called Israel today, and I will use the term Palestine, but not in a political sense. I'll use it in its historic sense, virtually identical with the land of Israel. But geographers today simply call it Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. And the borders of this land go up to the northern area of Mount Hermon, or Mount Hermon, the Lebanon mountains where Mount Hermon sticks up about 9,200 feet. The southern border of this land is not the Nile River, but the Wadi El Arish, which is a drainage system that drains the southern part of the land of Israel. It's a deep wadi that drains the water from this region off into the Mediterranean Sea. So we've got the northern and the southern boundaries, and then the eastern boundary would be the Transjordan Desert, and the western boundary would be the Mediterranean Sea. And all that is in between is the land of Israel. It's a relatively small land. The land of Israel is about the size of New Hampshire. And it's only about 150 miles north to south, about 50 miles east to west. So you can go from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, a distance of about 150 miles. It's about like driving from Portland to Seattle, Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. And it's only 50 miles from Jericho to Tel Aviv. So the land of Israel is very small, very narrow. The land is more narrow in the north than is in the south. You can see how the Mediterranean Sea coastland kind of swings out to the west toward Egypt. So the land is broader in the south, where it extends to about 85 miles wide, and more narrow in the north, where it's about 35 miles wide. So the land swings out into the Mediterranean Sea to make the southern part of the land more broad than the northern part. About 150 miles north to south, about 50 miles east to west. I said it's a tiny country, and here we have it compared with New Jersey, a fairly small country, and you can see how it's compared in the Midwest there. It's a tiny, tiny country. This is the land of Israel, the land that's so much disputed today among the nations. I need to clarify what the West Bank refers to. When we talk about the land of Israel, what is the West Bank? Well, the West Bank isn't a place you deposit your paycheck. That's not what it's about. It's not a financial institution. The West Bank is this term is used to describe a region of the land of Israel. And you can see where it's located. It's just to the west of the Mediterranean, just to the west of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. Now, from 1517 to 1917, this land was all part of the Ottoman Empire, ruled by the Turks. And they controlled North Africa, they controlled the Middle East, they controlled all of Turkey, and across in the Eastern European nations today. All of this was under the rule of the Ottomans for 400 years, from 1517 to 1917. But the Ottoman Empire aligned itself with the Axis nations during the First World War, and when the Axis nations lost, the victors, the Allies, decided to divide up the Ottoman Empire. And so they divided it up, and the British were assigned the area of Palestine. The French were assigned the Mandate of Syria. The British also were responsible for Iraq. And the land of Palestine was the land that was under the British rule, the British Mandate, from 1917 to 1947. In 1922, the areas to the east of the Jordan were separated and given to the Arabs. And this land became known as Transjordan, the land on the east side of the Jordan. And this was designated as the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And King Hussein was one of the rulers of this region, part of the Hashemite dynasty. And this was an Arab rule of an Arab nation over Arab people. And so this area for the Arabs was separated out from the rest of the land. But then in 1947, we find that the UN decided to divide up the rest of the land to the west of the Jordan, and have it shared between the Arabs and the Jews who were living there. This was a decision in 1947 to partition the land that was to the west of the Jordan into two states, an Arab state and an Israeli state. And they said that Jerusalem would become an international center accessible to both states. Well, the Jews accepted this. They said, okay, we're glad to have some land rather than no land after their experience in the Holocaust. But the Arabs said, no, we won't accept this decision, and there was a war. It was the war for Israel's independence as a nation in 1948, and as a result of this war, we find that Israel was able to secure its boundaries and actually took more territory than had been assigned by the UN. The state of Jordan crossed the Jordan River and claimed the West Bank during this war for independence. And from 1948 to 1967, this was part of Jordan's territory. They claimed it as part of their own territory. In 1967, there was a war between the Arab nations and Israel, and during this war, Israel captured the West Bank from Jordan and claimed the West Bank, and it continues under Israeli control since 1967. In 1988, King Hussein gave up any claim to this territory. He had captured it in the War of 48, he lost it in the War of 67, and in 1988 he said, I'm just washing my hands of this disputed territory, the West Bank. Now today, the Israelis call this West Bank region Judea and Samaria. Those are the biblical names. The Arabs call it occupied territory because the Jews are in control of this region, even though more than half of the people living in this area are Arabs. The Arabs call it occupied territory. The Jews call it Judea and Samaria. And this is the West Bank. And this is the area that's disputed so much today. And many say that Israel should give the West Bank to the Arabs. And Israel says, we've got a historic presence here in this area, and we have a right to this land that was promised by God to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We were the ones who lived here until the Romans came along and kicked us out, and even then many Jews continued living in the land. Well, you'll read about the West Bank. You read about activities in the West Bank. This is the West Bank. Now, on to the geography of Israel. Israel is a land of many contrasts. There are four basic geographical regions in the land of Israel. There's the coastal plain. There's the hill country that goes right through the center of the land. There's the Rift Valley, which is a deep rift in the Earth's crust, goes down to 1,300 feet below sea level at the Dead Sea. It starts between the Lebanon and Anti-Lebanon mountains, continues through the Jordan Valley, through the Dead Sea, on through the Negev area, and extends through the Red Sea into Africa, the Great Rift Valley. And then to the east of the Jordan Valley are the Transjordan Highlands. These are the four main geographical regions. A schematic can help us to identify these regions. You can see the Mediterranean Sea with the coastal plain and Mount Carmel. The coastal plain is divided at 2 points by the Yarkon River, which blocks travel along the coastal plain, and then the Wadi El Arish, which is the southern border of Israel. The mountains go right up the center, the spine or the backbone of the land. You can see the line from the upper Jordan to the Sea of Galilee, and then the lower Jordan all the way to the Dead Sea. This is the Rift Valley. And then east of that, you see the Transjordan Highlands. And cutting across the Transjordan Highlands are 4 streams, the Yarmouk, the Jabbok, the Arnon, and the Zered streams. which drain the Transjordan highlands. Let's look at these regions individually. We start with the coastal plain. And you can see from this beautiful satellite imagery this long coastal plain. And up in the north, at the northeast corner of the Mediterranean Sea, we've got the port of Salamis. And we've got, no, not Salamis, Seleucia, the port of Seleucia, which is the port of Antioch. And the little finger of Cyprus points right to the port of Antioch and the city of Antioch. We come south of that, and we have Syria and Lebanon, and then just west of the Sea of Galilee, we move into the land of Israel and the coastal plain region. The coastal plain region, about 165 miles from the north to Wadi El Arish. And this is basically a band of sand and alluvial soil. It's quite narrow in the north, about 3 miles wide, the coastal plain area, but then it broadens out in the south, getting as wide as 25 miles wide, as the coastal plain swings out toward Egypt in the south. And it's pretty much unbroken, a straight coastal plain, except for one point where Mount Carmel extends out into the Mediterranean Sea. And the divisions of this region were the plain of Asher, named after the tribe of Asher in the north. This is north of Mount Carmel. And then the coasts of Dor, which are south. And then the plain of Sharon. And then the Philistine coastal plain. Here we view the coastal plain with Tel Aviv right before us. You can see the little harbor there almost in the center of the photograph. That's Joppa. And that's the harbor from which Jonah set sail when he was fleeing from the will of the Lord and decided to go to Tarshish instead of Nineveh. And Joppa has pretty much been encompassed now by the modern city of Tel Aviv. Joppa is an ancient port, but you can see the modern city of Tel Aviv in the background with all its high-rise buildings and hotels and beachfront property. And this is a marvelous city to visit. It's like a modern European city with restaurants and museums and universities. It's just a really fun place to go. When I go to Israel, I like to go a couple days early and spend a couple of days in Tel Aviv looking at the museums and the shops, the antiquity shops, visiting Joppa. It's just a fun place to visit. It's a modern European city, very different from Jerusalem, which is much more traditional and much more religiously observant. But Tel Aviv is a fun place. We go from the coastal plain now to the hill country. And the hill country is really the spine of the land, running north and south through the land. And if you take a piece of paper and you put pressure on the two sides of the paper, it's going to fold up. And that's what's happened with the land of Israel. Pressure from the west and from the east has caused a mountain range to form right in the center of the land. It's a great limestone arch. And as the pressure from the continents brought pressure on this land, the land itself began to buckle, and it formed this mountain range. As we consider the land, we've got in the north, we've got Galilee, both upper and lower Galilee, a mountainous region. We've got the hill country region south of the Jezreel Valley, which includes Ephraim, the territory of Ephraim, or Samaria, as we know it in the New Testament times, and then the hill country of Judah. In the north, the hill country is about 4,000 feet in elevation, and then in the south, it's about 3,300 around the vicinity of Hebron. And here we have a nice aerial view of the hill country. Looking to the northwest, and we can see the hilly region. Now, we call it the hill country, and some translations use the word mountains. But when I think of mountains, I think of the Cascade Mountains, the mountains in Colorado. I think of serious snow-capped mountains. And there are some snow-capped mountains north of Israel in Mount Hermon. But the mountains in the land of Israel are more of what we consider coast hills. They're not tall mountains. Jerusalem is 2,500 feet above sea level. Hebron 3,300 feet above sea level. And in Galilee, the highest hills in Galilee are about 4,000 feet. So these are not that high. But you can see these rolling hills. And then around Jerusalem, you can see the deep valleys and the ridge lines around Jerusalem. And this is more of the hill country right around Israel. In the foreground, you can see some terracing because these hills are steep. In order to grow anything on these hills, you have to terrace the hills. And the terracing dates from ancient times as they tried to grow olives and wheat and various products on these terraces. We've looked at the coastal plain, the hill country, and now the Rift Valley. The Rift Valley is this deep crack in the Earth's crusts, and it runs north and south through the Lebanon Mountains, through the Jordan Valley, through the Dead Sea, through the Arava, which is to the south of the Dead Sea, going into the Red Sea, and then eventually into the continent of Africa. This is a great fissure in the Earth's crust. And there's quite a bit of debate among geographers as to how this formed. And this diagram illustrates that it seems to be that there was a crack and a dropping of the land area in this crack and the lifting up of the region around it. And as a result, you've got the hill country to the west and the Transjordan Plateau to the east, with the Rift Valley, including the Dead Sea, between the two. The Rift Valley is about 10 miles wide as it goes through the land of Israel. It's a natural barrier. It's a big crack in the land of Israel. It's a barrier from the east and the west. And you remember how 2.5 of the tribes, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, occupied the east side of the Jordan, and pretty much because of the width of this valley and the difficulty in crossing it, those tribes pretty much disappeared from Israel's history. We don't really hear too much about them in the book of Kings or Chronicles, and that's because of the Rift Valley. It was a difficult to communicate and travel across this great rift. In the north, we've got the Sea of Galilee, we've got the Jordan River, and then it comes down into the Dead Sea, and then continues on south into the area to the south of the Dead Sea, the Arava. This is a nice view of the Sea, of the Dead Sea and the Rift Valley. To the left, we've got the mountains of the wilderness and the wilderness region. And then in the foreground, we've got the Dead Sea. And this kind of continues on north, all the way up to this rift continues on north up to the Sea of Galilee, this great Rift Valley. Now, the fourth region, we've looked at the coastal plain, we've looked at the hill country, we've looked at the Rift Valley. The fourth geographical region is the Transjordan Highlands. And these Transjordan Highlands are the area to the east of the Jordan that rise up to an elevation of about 4,000 feet. And so that's why they call them the Highlands. Here's a view of the Transjordan Highlands across the Dead Sea. And so you can see the Rift Valley in the foreground with the Dead Sea, and in the background you see that mountainous ridge with those are the highlands of Transjordan. And here's what it looks like on a diagram. You've got the Jordan Valley on the left with the Jordan River, and then you've got this elevated plateau. And along that plateau, right at its western edge, is a highway known as the King's Highway. A little bit further to the east, right on the edge of the desert, is the Pilgrim's Road. And the agricultural zone is really between the King's Highway and the Pilgrim's Road, and that's where they can grow crops at this upper elevation agricultural region. And so there was a number of cities that settled along this region. The climate is colder than most of the land of Israel, and it gets quite a bit of rainfall actually in this region because it's in the higher elevation. As the air cools, it drops more moisture on this region. The runoff from the Transjordan highlands goes into the Yarmouk, the Jabbok, the Arnon, and the Zered rivers, and all of these empty into the Rift Valley. The Yarmouk and the Jabbok enter into the Jordan River, and the Arnon and the Zered enter into the Dead Sea, fill into the Dead Sea. These rivers or streams divide this Transjordan highland into 5 regions: the region of Bashan, the region of Gilead, the region of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. And these are areas that are pretty much outside the land of Israel, and oftentimes we see are invading the land of Israel. The Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, they come in and invade the land of Israel during various periods. Now, just to point out some sub-regions, we've looked at the main regions, north and south, the coastal plain, the hill country, the Rift Valley, and the Transjordan highlands. But there's also the region of Galilee in the north. And the Jezreel Valley separates the region of Galilee from the area of Ephraim, or as it's known in the New Testament, Samaria. We've already talked about the Jordan Valley. The Negev is the area in the south. It's the south country of the land of Israel. The area of Gaza, known as the Gaza Strip today, centers around the Philistine city of Gaza. And then the Shephelah, it's from the Hebrew word lowland, or foothills is a better translation. And this is the transitional zone between the hill country and the coastal plain, kind of some foothill area. So these are some sub-regions of the land of Israel. Let's consider a little bit about the climate of Israel. Some general considerations. The climate is influenced by 2 things: the Mediterranean Sea and the Arabian Desert. And the land of Israel is influenced by the Mediterranean Sea, and it brings moisture and warm, cool Mediterranean air into the land of Israel. And then from the east, you've got the Arabian Desert, and the Arabian Desert brings dry air and scorching heat into the land of Israel. And sometimes the greater influence is from the Arabian Desert, and things are hot and dry and dusty. And other times the winds come from the Mediterranean Sea, and the air is moist and cool and refreshing. And so these are the 2 main climate factors. People ask, has the climate changed since the biblical period? And I say no, because the Mediterranean Sea was there in the biblical period. The desert was there in the biblical period. The climate really hasn't changed much since the biblical period, if at all. There's 2 main factors in the climate in addition to the sea and the desert, and these factors are the distance from the sea and the elevation where you're living. The western portions of the land of Israel get more moderate temperatures and more abundant rainfall. The closer you are to the sea, the more humidity, the more rainfall you're going to get. The eastern portions are hotter and drier, have colder winters, and less annual rainfall. The higher you go up in elevation, the cooler it's going to get. That's why a lot of people like to live in Jerusalem and work in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv, it's muggy, it's humid, but in Jerusalem at 2,500 feet above sea level, it's refreshing. And the summer days are sunny and generally cool, at least in the morning, before it gets too warm. As you look at the rainfall map here, notice that the rainfall is indicated on the little scale below, and the more rainfall is indicated by the orange, and the yellow and the orange. And the less rainfall is indicated by the blue, which is just the opposite of what you would think. But the more rainfall, red and orange. So notice the map. Rainfall increases in the north and in the west. If you're along the coastal plain, you're going to get more rainfall. If you're in the area of Galilee or in the hill country, you're going to get more rainfall because of the higher elevation. In the south, on the other hand, rainfall decreases as you go to the south and as you go to the east, more toward the Rift Valley. The rainfall in the mountains is about 25 to 45 inches annually, and toward the south it's about 2 to 25 inches annually. The book of Joel speaks of the early and the latter rains. And to understand that, you need to understand the rainfall patterns in Israel. The rain comes in Israel during the winter. That's when you get the rain. During the summer, there is no rain. The rain stops in the summer. In Oregon, it rains kind of all the time. If you're lucky, you've got, after the 4th of July, you've got about 2 months before it starts to rain again. So July and August are the months to enjoy. But in Israel, you've got the rain in the winter, and the summers are dry. But there are the early and the latter rains. The early rains come in the fall, in early fall, and they serve to soften the soil and enable the people to plant their seeds in order to grow their crops. During the winter, their winter grain grows. And then in the spring, after the winter rain has grown, there's a little gap between the winter rains and the latter rains. And the latter rains come in early spring to give the wheat, the winter wheat, a boost so that it will be a full crop and an abundant crop. And both the early and the latter rains are necessary for good agriculture in Israel. If you don't have the early rains, you can't plant your crop. The soil is too hard and dry from the drought during the summer. If you don't have the latter rains, you're not going to get an abundant crop. You'll get a crop, but not an abundant crop. So God promises in the book of Joel, Joel 2:23, He's going to give the people the early rains and the latter rains. He's going to bless the people with a good crop. Temperature depends on elevation and distance from the sea. Temperatures tend to decrease with an increase in elevation. So the higher you go, the cooler it is. It's kind of fun to get up on the Golan Heights on a hot day because you cool down. It's nice in the hill country and on the Golan Heights. Get back down to the Sea of Galilee and it's warm and sometimes muggy. Temperatures decrease with an increase in elevation, and the further the region is from the Mediterranean Sea, the less the influence of the sea breeze, and the less of that cooling effect of the sea breeze. I remember standing along the shores of the Dead Sea one afternoon late, and all of a sudden there was a bit of a stir, and that sea to land breeze that blows across the land of Israel had finally reached in the late afternoon the Dead Sea, and it was just so pleasant to get a little bit of a breeze blowing on us on the shores of the Dead Sea. There's a wind that comes out of the desert, and it's called the scorching wind in James 1:11, and it basically sucks the moisture right out of the ground, right out of the plants, and out of the people. It's the sirocco, the hot, dry desert wind that blows during the transitional seasons of the year and produces high temperatures and a lot of dust because the wind comes out of the desert. And the Bible talks about how the wind dries up the plants and brings drought. The economy in ancient Israel. One more picture here, one more slide. The proximity to the sea and the proximity of the desert also affect the climate. The more when you have an influence from the sea, it's cool air and moisture. When you have the influence from the desert, it's hot air and it's dry. And these are the factors of the wind. Oh, this is a picture of a sirocco that comes out of the desert. You're looking at a satellite image down on the land of Israel, and you pretty much can't see a thing because it's all dusty due to this wind that comes out of the desert. The agriculture. Well, the land of Israel is blessed with good soil. It's called it's called a Sinonian soil that it becomes from. It's called Terra Rosa soil because it comes from the Sinomanian limestone. As the Sinomanian limestone begins to deteriorate, it turns into this very red Mediterranean terra rosa soil. It's very productive, but you can also see there's a lot of rocks in the soil which have to be removed, and so the rocks are removed from the agricultural land, and the rocks are used to build a wall or a watchtower. The soil is very productive but very rocky and patchy in ancient times. Terracing has been used in ancient and in modern times to guard against erosion and preserve the soil. And so you can see these terraces in the hill country, and these terraces are thousands of years old. This isn't something the modern Israelis figured out. These terraces have been there for a long time. And in the lower right of the picture you can see how the terraces are used with various crops that are grown here on these terraced areas. You can grow your wheat, your olives, your grapes, all on these terraced regions. Land of Israel is a beautiful land. I like to go there in the springtime because that's when the flowers are in bloom. I like to go there in May. Mid-May to mid-June is really the nicest time to go because the wildflowers are in bloom, the land is colorful. Later on, as the land dries out because of the lack of rainfall, everything kind of turns brown and the flowers die and it's not as beautiful. But in the spring of the year, it's a lovely place to visit. Key products for the land of Israel are mentioned a number of times in Scripture. Deuteronomy 7, verse 13 mentions these three crops: olives, wheat, and grapes. And you'll find these three crops mentioned again and again. Nehemiah 5:11, Psalm 104, verse 15, olives, wheat, and grapes. These are the essentials for living in ancient times. The olives would provide oil for cooking, for burning lamps, for anointing. The wheat used to make bread. The grapes use them for raisins and to make wine, and to use the grapes for various other dishes as well. Vinegar was produced with the grapes. So these were the main Mediterranean crops. In ancient times, the land was forested. Because the Ottomans taxed the land on the basis of how many trees you had on your property, the people during the period of Ottoman rule cut down their trees. And the cutting down of the trees led to erosion. And by the time Israel became a state, the land had been denuded of its trees, and the Israelis worked hard to reforest the land. And today the land has been reforested. There are many forests in Israel now, even forest fires, but in ancient times there was no lack of trees, and the Israelis were told when they conquered somebody in the land not to destroy the trees, preserve the trees, and keep the trees in the land because they keep the soil healthy and can be used for various products. The building material in ancient Israel was limestone, and that continues to be the main building material today, even in modern times. Building was done with stone and some mud brick, but the limestone is the most durable building material in the land of Israel, and it is abundant. This whole mountain range that goes up north and south through the land of Israel is made of Sinomanian limestone. And this is a fine vanilla-colored limestone that can be easily cut and shaped. And actually the law in Israel, the law in Jerusalem, is that any building that's made of concrete has to be faced with Sinomanian limestone. So all the buildings have this beautiful limestone as on the surface of the buildings. But this was a natural resource in ancient times, and the limestone was used to build houses and various buildings. It breaks along straight lines and can be nicely and easily shaped for building. And here's the western wall, all made of Sinomanian limestone. This nice vanilla-looking limestone that was used in ancient times and continues to be in use today. Pastoral work, well, along with the agriculture of growing grapes and olives and wheat, the ancient people were shepherds, and they took care of sheep and goat. They raised the sheep and goat for their wool, for their skins, for their milk, and for their meat. But eating meat was kind of a rare thing for the ancient people. You had to kill an animal to eat the meat, and the animals were valuable. So most of the diet of the ancients was more of a vegetarian diet. Meat was usually served only in connection with a sacrifice and a festival, or sometimes when you were honoring a special guest. Travel in ancient Israel was along three main routes, and these all ran north and south. Now, there were east-west routes that connected these main routes, but I want you to be familiar with the main routes, the main travel routes. And the one that is most prominent is the International Coastal Highway, and it runs from Egypt all the way up to Mesopotamia. And there were three cities along this highway that Solomon fortified. According to 1 Kings 9, verse 15, Solomon fortified Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer. And Solomon knew that if he could control traffic along this international highway, then he could be in control of the whole ancient eastern world. And so he fortified Hatzor, he fortified Megiddo, and he fortified Gezer to make sure that he could control what was going along on this major travel route. 1 Kings 9, verse 15 mentions these fortress cities. There was also a road that went right through the central part of the hill country, and this is called the watershed route, or the Central Ridge route. And the water would flow to the west, and the water would flow to the east along this Central Ridge route, or the watershed route. And this was a lesser important route, but it went north and south through the land of Israel. And so you could follow the watershed route, or the Central Ridge route, and going north up to Samaria from Jerusalem, or south down to Hebron from Jerusalem. And then across the Jordan River, on the east side of the land, is the Transjordan Highway. And this would be an international route that would eventually connect with the coastal route and continue on up to Mesopotamia. So these are the three major routes through the land of Israel. And here we have them illustrated, and I've given you a map that you can use to sketch these main travel routes. You can see the International Coastal Highway divides in the south. There's a route that goes a bit inland and a route that goes directly along the coast. And this route continues on up to the Jezreel Valley, where it divides again. And there's a coastal route that continues north, and another route, an inland route, that continues on to the city of Damascus and further up to Mesopotamia. The red line is the Central Ridge line, and it begins in the south, in the vicinity of the Negev, the south area, and continues on north and comes into the Jezreel Valley. The blue line is the Transjordan Highway. And you can see a couple of brown lines there, which are the lines that connect these routes from east to west. And there's a line that goes from the coastal plain up to the Benjamin Plateau area and then down to Jericho, and another line that goes from the coastal plain through Beersheba and then on across the Rift Valley to the area of Arabia. And so these are some more routes through the land. Don't be overwhelmed by this slide, but I want you to, on the maps that I provided for you, I want you to fill in the regions that you can see on this map. So I'll work with you here, but make sure you have that map handy that I sent. And you can see there's the area of Upper Galilee and Lower Galilee right in the center of your map. So right on that map, Upper Galilee and Lower Galilee. Upper and Lower Galilee. To the east of Upper Galilee is the Upper Jordan area, which is called the Hula Valley. It has nothing to do with Hawaii or hula hoops or hula dancing, but this is the name of this valley, this Hula Valley that the Upper Jordan River flows through. And then to the east of the Hula Valley and the Jordan River is the territory of Bashan. This is the territory of Bashan. We mentioned Upper and Lower Galilee. To the east along the coastal plain is the coast of Asher, named after the tribe of Asher. South of that, we have the region of Mount Carmel and the coasts of Dor. This is named for a little coastal town, and just south of the Mount Carmel range, we have the coast of Dor and the plain of Sharon south of that. You'll also note that just below Lower Galilee is the Jezreel Valley. Below that, we've got Har Ephraim, the hill country of Ephraim. And Har means the hills or mountain in Hebrew, and this is a reference to the hill country of Ephraim, the mountain of Ephraim. And then we've got the Jordan Valley with a little squiggly line, the Jordan River, and just over there we've got the region of Gilead. We've got Bashan in the north on the east side of the Jordan River, and Gilead a little bit further south. So these are the main regions of the upper part of the land of Israel, but we're not done. And we now look to the south and we see more of these regions. The Philistine coastal plain is on our left. This was the part of the coastal plain where the Philistine made their home. And just to the east of that, we've got the band of the Shephelah. The Shephelah are the foothills. And the foothills are a transitional zone from between the coastal plain and Har Judah, the hill country of Judah. So you've got the Shephelah, the foothills, then you've got the hill country of Judah, Har Judah, and then you have the wilderness that parallels the Dead Sea, the Judean wilderness. To the east of the Dead Sea, we've got the plains of Moab, and we've got Ammon, known for the Ammonites. South of Moab, we've got Edom. South of the Dead Sea, we've got the Rift Valley and the region of the Arabah, this dry region just to the north and just to the south of the Dead Sea. And then south of the hill country, we've got the Negev area, the southland, and then further south we've got Sinai. So these are the regions of the land of Israel. And when you are looking at an atlas or thinking about the land of Israel, these are the regions that you should be familiar with. So I've introduced them to you. I'm going to leave the PowerPoint slide up while we take a break, and I'll switch back to the first one here and leave that on for a few minutes. And if you missed a little fill in there, go ahead and do that. Take a break. We'll be back in 10 minutes. And we'll be focusing our attention in our second hour on the city of Jerusalem. So we've had an overview of the land of Israel, but in the second hour we're going to focus our attention on Jerusalem. I want you to get acquainted with the city of Jerusalem, the most important city in all the world. So let's take a break.